Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Ursha, and this week we are doing another movie review. This is The Gorgon, which came out in 1964 from Hammer Films, of course, and was directed by Terence Fisher. This is definitely one of my favorite Hammer horror films, outside of the Hammer Dracula franchise, of course. And the film does star Peter Cushing in the role of Dr. Namarov, as well as the great Christopher Lee in the role of Professor Carl Meister. The film also stars the lovely Barbara Shelley in the role of Carla Hoffman. And Richard Pascoe in the role of Paul Heitz. So, yeah, this is such a fun, enjoyable film. This is just Hammer at its best, firing on all cylinders. It's just got everything you love about Hammer films. It's got a great, over-the-top, soundtrack, I love it. It's got Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, and they're both at their absolute best here. They're brilliant. Christopher Lee, though, doesn't show up till halfway into the film, but when he does, it's bam, Christopher Lee just steals the movie pretty much. He's so good as Professor Carl Meister. He's awesome. But yeah. So the film begins basically, we meet this young man, Bruno Heitz, and him and his girlfriend, he's doing a portrait, a painting of her, and she tells him that she's pregnant. So I guess he goes and leaves to tell her father about it. I guess he is afraid he's not going to approve, The father, I guess, has tried to pressure them into getting married, so yeah. So he kind of storms off and leaves her there and leaves to go tell the father. So she goes and follows him. But she's way behind. She can't catch up to him. She runs out late at night in the middle of the woods in the dark, and she sees some kind of horrifying figure, and it turns her face petrified, And later we find her out, we see her body, apparently she has turned to stone. So when that happens, we meet Dr. Namarov, as played by Peter Cushing, and we're not quite sure what to think about his character, whether he's an asshole or a good man, He's kind of in between in this movie, but Peter Cushing just does a great job, keeping you guessing whether he, a part of him I think is good, part of him knows what's going on, and knows what happened to the woman's body, why she turned to stone, because everyone in the town knows about a certain legend of Megara, the legend of the Gorgon, which is a mythological character in Greek mythology. And apparently Megara was one of the three sisters, one of them, of course, being Medusa. And, they got the head with the snakes for hair, the monster with the snakes for hair. When she looks at you, turns you into stone. So apparently in the Greek legend, Megara was beheaded, but apparently they think her spirit has taken on the human form. I think in actual Greek mythology, Megara was not one of the three sisters. I think they had a different name. Obviously Medusa was one of them. But I think they kind of just made that name up for the Hammer horror film, So yeah, what happens is there's a trial, and Bruno Heitz is accused of the young woman's murder. Because later on they find Bruno in the woods, and apparently he hung himself. He couldn't take it, So they accuse him of murder. So even though he's dead, he can't go on trial, but still, Bruno's father comes down there to the trial, and he wants to do everything he can to clear his son's good name. He doesn't believe he murdered them. And Dr. Nemiroff, as I said, is like covering it up. Even though he knows what happened to the body, he won't let anyone see the body. And Dr. Nemiroff's assistant is played by Barbara Shelley, Carla Hoffman, beautiful young woman. And Dr. Nemiroff definitely kind of has a thing for her too. But what happens when the father comes to defend his name? He ends up kind of stumbling into this deserted like castle in the middle of the night, and he gazes upon the Gorgon. And his face is petrified once again, and he falls victim to the Gorgon Megara. And he starts turning to stone. But right before he does, he writes a letter to his other son, talking about what happened to him, that he's turning to stone, and you need to come down here and investigate. And that's what he does. Because now the son, Paul Heights, played by Richard Pascoe in the film, comes down to try and investigate, see what the heck is going on. And in the meantime, he does kind of fall for Carla. I mean, because who wouldn't? It's Barbara Shelley. She's beautiful. Very, very charming and charismatic, and she does a fantastic job in this film. I love Barbara Shelley. Definitely a staple of Hammer films. And yeah, even she knows the history, she knows the story, she knows the legend, and she believes that Megara is out there, somewhere, and needs to be stopped. And what happens to Richard Pascoe? He starts investigating, and he stumbles onto the legend. He storms the castle, and he ends up seeing like her reflection in the mirror, and he gets petrified, and he starts to show the signs and the symptoms of becoming petrified and turning to stone. But it doesn't quite completely infect him, it seems to be a really slow progression, not like the father, because he didn't look directly at her, he just kind of saw her through reflection in the mirror, so I guess it didn't have quite the same effect. But yeah, he does kind of fall victim, and but in the meantime he's still trying to investigate while he can, before he actually fully turns into stone, to try and clear his brother's name and find out what happened to his father, and to help him in the process is Professor Karl Meister, and he is the teacher of young Paul at the university. And he comes to check on Paul to see what he's doing, why he left so suddenly, and then he finds out about the story, and he's pretty well versed in mythology and history and all that. So he knows just what to do, and he's so charismatic, so intense. I love Christopher Lee, and this is one of his best performances, I think, in a Hammer movie. He's just fantastic. But he's great in everything he does, but he almost like steals the show. It's so funny. Like, he just comes in, he's so tall and imposing figure, And you see him take on Dr. Nemiroff, and they really like clash, And Dr. Nemiroff is very jealous because young Paul is trying to take, Carla, Carla basically wants him to take her away with him and, run away into the sunset, And Nemiroff ain't cool with that. He gets very jealous and very obsessed with trying to take him away from Carla, So yeah, there comes the bad side of Dr. Nemiroff comes out later in the film, and everything just comes to a head. Everything comes to a huge conclusion where we have an epic battle in the Gothic castle with Megara, the Gorgon. It's awesome. I love it. A lot of people sometimes have issue with the look of the Gorgon, and maybe they kind of had, like, they used animatronics for the snakes on her head, the hair, and it didn't quite work too well. You know, it was a little bit stiff, you know. I still think it looks cool. I think she looked cool, and she was played very well. And of course, there's a huge twist at the end in classic Hammer style, which is awesome. I love it. Definitely, absolutely, highly recommend The Gorgon from 1964 from Hammer Films. It's a classic Hammer horror film in every way. Like I said, you got Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee at the prime of their careers. You got that awesome score, you got the great gothic atmosphere, the fog, the mist, the giant castle. It's got everything you want in a Hammer horror film. You got a great monster in the Gorgon based on the Greek mythology, and that's just awesome. I love it. It's a Hammer horror classic. So guys, I highly recommend the Gorgon. I give it 2 devil horns up, and thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Urshan, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.